The Mating Mind by Geoffrey Miller. Picture yourself wandering through one of those grand museums in New York or Paris, the kind that makes you feel small in the best way possible. On one corner, there's the Museum of Natural History, packed with towering dinosaur skeletons and displays of our ape-like ancestors. It's basically a timeline of survival. All teeth, claws, finding your next meal, and desperately trying not to become someone else's. Pretty straightforward stuff, really. But then you stroll across the street to the Museum of Art, and suddenly everything shifts. You're surrounded by Rembrandt's haunting self-portraits, peacock-shaped sitars, soul-stirring poetry, ethereal music, and sculptures that take your breath away. None of this helps anyone survive. In fact, from a pure survival standpoint, it's all completely pointless. So here's the puzzle. How did we jump from one museum to the other? How did a bunch of clever apes, mostly worried about lunch and not getting eaten, suddenly start painting the Sistine Chapel, writing symphonies, and cracking jokes that make people laugh? The standard explanation goes something like this. All these wonderful things, art, morality, humor, creativity, are basically lucky accidents. They're the bonus features that came with having oversized brains, which we originally developed for making tools and outwitting predators. Our intelligence was meant to be survival software, and art just happened to be a fun app we discovered in our downtime. But here's a thought. What if we've got the whole story completely backwards? What if the things we're most proud of, our creativity, our kindness, our ability to make someone laugh so hard they cry, aren't accidents at all? What if these qualities are precisely why our minds became so extraordinary in the first place? This is the mind-bending idea at the core of Geoffrey Miller's book, The Mating Mind. This wildly successful book, which has captivated hundreds of thousands of readers and transformed how we think about human nature, drops a bombshell. The human mind didn't evolve as a survival machine. It evolved as a courtship machine. By the time we're done here, you'll understand something profound about yourself. Our most treasured human abilities evolved for exactly the same reason peacocks have those ridiculously elaborate tails, to attract mates. You'll discover that our ancestors, simply by choosing partners they found charming, witty, and kind, accidentally became the architects of the minds we carry today. This isn't ancient history. It's about the hidden forces shaping your desires, your talents, and your search for connection right now, in this moment. Let's dive in. Every living creature on this planet is caught up in two epic struggles. First, the struggle to survive. Second, the struggle to reproduce. For the longest time, scientists figured the survival part explained pretty much everything. Charles Darwin called it natural selection, survival of the fittest. The organisms best suited to their environment stick around long enough to pass on their genes. It's elegant, powerful, and explains a ton about how nature works. But there was one thing that absolutely drove Darwin crazy. One gorgeous, illogical, magnificent thing that seemed to make a mockery of his entire theory. The peacock's tail. He actually wrote to a friend once, "The sight of a feather in a peacock's tail whenever I gaze at it makes me sick. Why the drama?" Because that tail makes zero sense from a survival angle. It's ridiculously heavy. It's awkward to drag around. Those brilliant colors might as well be a flashing billboard saying, "Hey, predators, easy lunch over here." Any peacock would survive way better with a short, boring, practical tail. So why on earth do they strut around with these impractical masterpieces? The answer Darwin eventually figured out unlocked a second evolutionary force just as powerful as survival. He called it sexual selection. Natural selection is about fitting into your environment. Sexual selection is about fitting the preferences of potential mates. The peacock's tail didn't evolve to impress Mother Nature. It evolved to impress the ladies, the peahens. Generation after generation, peahens kept choosing males with slightly fancier, more colorful tails. Those attractive males got more action, passing on their flashy tail genes. Meanwhile, the peahens passed on their preference for fancy tails to their daughters. These two forces, The male trait and the female preference got locked in an evolutionary arms race. Think of it like fashion trends on steroids. The tails got bigger and more spectacular, while the peahens' standards kept rising until we ended up with the almost absurdly magnificent tail we see today. Terrible for survival, brilliant for seduction. This is the key Geoffrey Miller uses to crack open the mystery of the human mind. He asks a deceptively simple question. What if the human mind is our version of the peacock's tail? What if our most dazzling mental abilities, our talent for art, music, storytelling, humor, and even kindness, evolved not because they helped us survive, but because they helped us get dates? Think about it for a second. Our minds are wildly more creative, witty, and articulate than we'd ever need for basic survival on the African savanna. We could build shelters and find food with chimpanzee-level intelligence. But we don't just communicate. We write poetry that makes people weep. We don't just make noise. We compose symphonies that give people goosebumps. We don't just have social rules. We develop complex moral philosophies and argue about them over dinner. From a pure survival perspective, all of this is an absurd waste of energy. But from a sexual selection perspective, it's exactly what we'd expect. These are courtship displays, designed to attract and entertain potential partners. They're the human version of that peacock's tail. This idea was so radical that even after Darwin proposed it, the scientific community basically ignored it for over a century. It seemed too weird, too focused on what they saw as the trivial whims of females. Scientists were comfortable with males fighting each other for dominance that felt serious and businesslike. But the notion that female aesthetic preferences could shape evolution, that seemed ridiculous. So for 100 years, biology obsessed over survival of the fittest, and the human mind remained this frustrating mystery, the one thing Darwinism couldn't quite explain. It wasn't until the late 20th century that scientists rediscovered Darwin's forgotten idea and finally had the tools to understand its incredible power. So how exactly does this courtship machine actually work? Miller explains there are a few key mechanisms driving sexual selection. The first, as we saw with peacocks, is called runaway selection. This is that fashion cycle feedback loop. Imagine our early hominid ancestors. Let's say a few females randomly developed a slight preference for males who could make more interesting vocal sounds. Those males would have a small reproductive advantage. Their sons would inherit the sound-making ability, and their daughters would inherit the preference for it. Over time, the sounds could become increasingly complex, evolving into song, while the preference for musical talent became more refined. The trait and the taste run away together, producing something far more elaborate than survival ever required. This could explain why certain traits pop up in one species, but not in close relatives. Why did humans develop language but chimps didn't? Maybe our lineage just happened to fall into a runaway process that favored verbal skill, while the chimp lineage took a different path. Runaway is unpredictable and quirky, which helps explain the beautiful, seemingly random diversity of life. But runaway selection has its limits. It usually predicts that courtship traits will evolve mostly in one sex, typically males. But in humans, while there are some differences, both men and women have incredibly complex minds. Men's brains are only slightly larger on average than women's, and there's no difference in general intelligence. If our brain was purely a runaway trait like the peacock's tail, we'd expect men to have massive, brilliant brains and women to have chimp-sized ones. That's obviously not the case. This brings us to the second and possibly most important mechanism, fitness indicators. Imagine you're choosing a partner. You can't actually see their genes. There's no DNA printout available to check for harmful mutations. So how do you know you're picking someone with good genes who'll give your children the best shot at a healthy life? You look for clues. You search for signals of health, energy, and intelligence. But here's the catch. Anyone can claim they're healthy and smart. A signal only works if it's reliable, if it can't be easily faked. So how does evolution create honest signals? Through what's called the handicap principle. An honest signal of fitness has to be costly. It has to be a genuine handicap, something that someone in poor health or with bad genes simply couldn't afford to produce. A Rolex is a reliable signal of wealth, not because it tells time better than a $10 watch, but because it's so expensive that only a wealthy person can afford one. The cost guarantees the honesty. The peacock's tail is a handicap. It requires enormous energy to grow and maintain, and it makes the peacock more vulnerable to predators. Only a genuinely healthy, fit peacock can afford such a burden. A sickly peacock, trying to grow a magnificent tail, would quickly become lunch or die of exhaustion. So when a peacock sees a male with a spectacular tail, she's not just admiring pretty colors. She's getting reliable information about his genetic quality. She's essentially thinking, any guy who can survive while dragging that thing around must have incredible genes. Miller argues that our most impressive mental abilities are handicaps too. They're costly displays that function as fitness indicators. Take our brain itself. It's only 2% of our body weight, but guzzles 20% of our energy. Growing and running a big brain is incredibly expensive. Just thinking hard for a few hours can leave you exhausted and starving. Why so costly? Because that cost makes our mental displays honest signals of fitness. Activities like witty conversation, artistic creation, or composing music are genuinely difficult to do well. They require a brain that's healthy, efficient, and well-developed. Someone carrying lots of harmful mutations or dealing with poor health would struggle to be brilliantly entertaining. This is why we find certain qualities so irresistibly attractive. Consider art. From an evolutionary perspective, art seems like a complete waste of time. Why would our ancestors spend hours painting cave walls or carving intricate figurines when they could have been hunting or gathering? The answer is that art is a phenomenal fitness indicator. Creating beautiful art requires manual dexterity, fine motor control, an eye for symmetry, patience, and tons of time. It demonstrates conscientiousness and intelligence. Those famous prehistoric hand axes, for example, are often found in pristine condition, never actually used. Many are far too large or too small to be practical tools. They're beautifully symmetrical, crafted with skill that went way beyond what you'd need for butchering an animal. Archaeologists now believe these hand axes weren't tools at all, but works of art. Humanity's first. They were sexual ornaments, created by males to impress females with their skill and genetic quality. The same logic applies to morality and kindness. Standard evolutionary theory struggles to explain altruism. Why would we be kind to people who aren't relatives and might never return the favor? Miller's answer: kindness is sexy. In a massive study of sexual preferences across 37 cultures, kindness was rated as the single most important trait in a partner by both men and women. It ranked higher than looks, intelligence, or wealth. Why? Because acts of generosity, sympathy, and fairness are costly handicaps. They're hard to fake convincingly. A truly selfish, manipulative person might pretend to be kind briefly, but it's tough to maintain the act long term. Genuine kindness reveals character, the ability to care for a partner and children. When our ancestors chose mates, they weren't just looking for good genes. They were looking for good partners. Someone kind and generous was a much safer bet for a long-term relationship. So morality didn't evolve because it was good for the group. It evolved because it was attractive. Our moral virtues are sexual ornaments, designed to advertise our character to potential mates. And then there's the greatest human ornament of all: language. Other animals have communication systems, but they're incredibly limited. A monkey might have a call for leopard, another for eagle, and a few for social messages. But they can't combine these calls to create new meanings. They can't tell stories about the leopard they spotted last week, or speculate about where the eagle might nest next year. Human language is infinitely creative. Our average vocabulary is around 60,000 words, but we only need a few hundred to get through a typical day. Why do we have this vast, luxurious vocabulary stuffed with rare and beautiful words? Because language is our primary courtship display. It's how we reveal our minds to each other. Verbal courtship showcases our intelligence, creativity, knowledge, personality, and sense of humor. Think of Cyrano de Bergerac, the poet with the enormous nose, who could win any woman's heart with his words. Or Scheherazade, the storyteller who saved her life and won the king's love by weaving tales for 1001 nights. Their stories resonate because they're true to a deep evolutionary logic. A mind that can entertain, surprise, and delight another mind is an incredibly attractive mind. A large vocabulary is a fitness indicator. It correlates strongly with intelligence, and intelligence signals a healthy, well-developed brain. Quick wit displays mental agility. The ability to tell a good story demonstrates memory, imagination, and social intelligence. This explains why we spend so much time just talking. From a survival perspective, much of our conversation is useless gossip. But from a courtship perspective, it's absolutely crucial. We're constantly assessing each other's minds through the words we choose. On a first date, we're not just exchanging information, we're performing. We're putting our minds on display, hoping the other person finds our performance attractive. This brings us to the most playful of our mental ornaments, creativity and humor. Why do we find novelty so appealing? Why is good sense of humor one of the most common requests in dating profiles? Because creativity is the ultimate courtship strategy. The ability to constantly generate new ideas, fresh jokes, and original stories is powerful for keeping a partner interested. It's an anti-boredom device. In the long-term relationships crucial for raising human children, a partner who could keep you entertained was one you were more likely to stick with. Humor is a particularly potent form of creative display. To make someone laugh, you have to surprise them. You have to violate their expectations in a clever, non-threatening way. This requires deep understanding of their mind and the cognitive flexibility to play with ideas. A good sense of humor signals a brilliant, agile, socially intelligent mind. No wonder we find it so irresistible. It's literally the wit to woo. When we look at the complete suite of human mental abilities, a pattern emerges. The things that make us most human, the qualities we value most in ourselves and others, all bear the hallmarks of sexual selection. They're costly, elaborate, and beautiful. They're not tools for survival. They're works of art. Our minds didn't evolve to be practical. They evolved to be interesting. They evolved to be beautiful. And they became that way because for hundreds of thousands of years, our ancestors fell in love with people who had beautiful minds. They chose partners who could make them laugh, tell them stories, and show them kindness. In doing so, they acted as the artists who sculpted the human brain. We're the living embodiment of their desires. We're the descendants of the poets, artists, and comedians of the Pleistocene. What I find so captivating about this idea is how it completely transforms our perspective on human nature. It suggests that the most beautiful, noble, and joyful parts of our experience aren't just decorative extras. They're the central engine of our evolution. It takes the things traditional science dismissed as frivolous, art, music, humor, love, and places them at the very heart of the human story. This doesn't reduce our highest achievements to crude biology. It does the opposite. It elevates courtship from a simple biological function to a powerful creative force. It suggests that the search for a partner isn't just about reproduction. It's about finding a mind that fascinates and inspires our own. Our ancestors weren't just looking for healthy bodies. They were looking for interesting souls. And in that search, they built the very souls we now possess. So how can we carry this profound lesson into our own lives? First, the next time you feel a sense of beauty, whether from music, a painting, or even a well-told joke, take a moment to appreciate it not just as a pleasant experience, but as a connection to this deep evolutionary history. Recognize that the thrill you feel is a distant echo of the thrill an ancestor felt when they encountered a creative, skillful, intelligent mind. You're using a beautifully evolved capacity for judgment that's been millions of years in the making. Second, Think about how you present yourself to the world. We live in a society that often tells us our value lies in our job title, income, or possessions. But the mating mind reminds us that our most attractive qualities are far more fundamental. Your kindness, your sense of humor, your ability to tell a good story, your passion for an idea, these are your true ornaments. They're indicators of the health and vitality of your mind. Don't hide them, cultivate them, and display them generously. Finally, when you're getting to know someone, remember that you're participating in this ancient and beautiful process of mutual choice. You're not just assessing them, you're being assessed. And the most important assessment isn't about superficial qualities, but about the mind and character within. Listen to their stories, pay attention to their acts of kindness, see if they can make you laugh. You're looking for more than a partner. You're looking for a mind that your mind can dance with. That was a summary of The Mating Mind by Geoffrey Miller. We've touched on the big ideas today, but let's be honest. No summary can ever replace the experience of reading the book itself. The real magic isn't just in knowing the theory. It's in the journey the author takes you on, the countless fascinating examples, and those quiet moments when an idea clicks into place and changes how you see everything. This summary is your map, but the book is the territory. If anything we've discussed has sparked your curiosity, I genuinely encourage you to pick up a copy. Reading it isn't just an intellectual exercise, it's an adventure into the very heart of who we are. The link to the book is in the description. Also, if you found this journey valuable, please take a moment to like and subscribe. It tells us that these deep dives matter and ensures you won't miss our next exploration into another life-changing book from the billionaire's bookshelf. Thank you for joining me, and let's keep growing together.